I am Chris Poirier. I'm the pastoral resident here at Calvary Baptist Church. I'm originally coming from Raleigh, North Carolina, where, believe it or not, I continue to be a co-host of a podcast that talks about nothing but comics, but it's also about comics and faith, so it's the intersection of both. I am a published author, as strange as that seems. I had the joy of being able to write a devotion for one of my friends who has a ministry called Faith and Fandom. Hector is a very good friend of mine. You're going to hear a lot about Hector because today's talk is actually going to come from his second book, where he talks a lot about Captain America, Steve Rogers, and the importance of the shield of faith. So, who is Captain America? Well, he's Steve Rogers, right? How many of you already knew that? You've seen the movies and all that? There's a Captain America shirt sitting in the audience, so that's awesome. So Steve Rogers, right? He was originally created all the way back in 1941, long time ago. Cap has been around much longer than the movies have been around, much longer than I've been around, much longer than a lot of folks have been around. But he was originally created to be a patriotic superhero going into uncertain times. Captain America wasn't created before Pearl Harbor and before America entered World War II. He was created going into the war, knowing potentially that something could happen. A nation needed a hero. Comics had started being written in 1938, so 3 years earlier. Batman and Superman first hit the scene, and then came Cap. This 98-pound, scrawny little kid from Brooklyn that wanted nothing else but to serve his country in a time of war. But he couldn't make it. He was frail, he was sick. So how did Steve become Captain America? That's part of the story, right? He was frozen. But before he was entered into the super soldier program by the United States government, they shot him up with all kinds of chemicals, and bam, we got a superhero, right? So it's pretty amazing. It's pretty wild. Sorry, guys, that's probably one you're not going to be able to hook yourself up with unless you spend a lot of time in the gym. But that's okay. You can do that. Just no super serum. Got that? Good. That's very fair. But you can get that through hard gains as well. So who is Captain America's best friend? Bucky. Who's Bucky? He's the Winter Soldier, right? So Bucky was one of his absolute best friends, stuck with him from growing up all the way through the war, beyond, and things got really complicated, right? And then, as you said, the end of the war, Cap was chasing down the Tesseract, right? He's headed up to the North Pole, and he gets frozen in ice there and completely forgot and lost to time. He is then later found, thawed out, years later, into a world that he doesn't know and he doesn't understand. And we have Captain America. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide there, bud. Thanks. So other than his best friend, a super soldier, and everything else, what is the most iconic thing about Steve Rogers that's important to know? Shield, right? He has this really amazing red, white, and blue shield that he carries everywhere. And what's the importance of this shield? It's something that can protect him, right? Shields have that thing of it's something that you can put on, you can throw that bad boy on, and you can get behind it, and you can attack towards your enemies, you can get protection. But what else does Cap do with this shield that's really unique? He throws it, right? This heavy metal shield made of the most wonderful made-up material ever known as vibranium, which comes from the great land of Wakanda. That's right. We got one Wakanda forever. Absolutely. All right, I know I'm hitting my audience today, and that's great. So it's got the red, white, and blue. It's very patriotic. And what is absolutely true about this shield and Steve? They're never separated, almost never separated, which is really important to what we're going to talk about today, right? All right, so today we want to talk about what does Steve Rogers and this shield have to do with our faith? So 3 things for us to take a look at today. You guys ready? I'm not super convinced that you guys are ready. All right, Avengers assemble. Let's get going. All right, so point number 1 for today. Heroes of the faith never fight alone is the thing that I want to have in the back of your head as we go through today. But the first point for today is God is our shield. Psalm 7:10 says this, "My shield is God most high. who saves the upright in heart. So David, the psalmist, is talking about a very simple reality, that God functions as a shield in our worldly battles, right? We know that there's evil, wickedness, terrible things that occur in the world, but David reminds each and every one of us that we have a shield, a protector, something that goes before us so that we can function in the world. And that's a shield. And what's totally amazing about this and outstanding for us to remember is, as God functions as our shield, that means that this is not our battle to fight. He's always going to stand before us. He's always going to function as that protector. Always. And that's such an amazing thing. So how does that compare to the reality of what Cap does with his shield? As I said, one of the things that's most amazing about Steve is he is never without his shield. So just like us as Christians, we're never supposed to enter the world or enter battles without God before us, without Christ before us, right? As Christians, we've made that decision. We've invited Christ into our lives. And from that moment forward, we're always going into the world. We don't go alone. We forget that a lot, though, right? We know that things get hard. We acknowledge that things get hard. But the most amazing part of our relationship with Christ is the fact that no matter where we go, he always goes before us. So David's reminding us here in the Psalms how important that is, that we have a defense, that God goes before and he provides that protection to us in the world. But does that mean that we're supposed to just cower behind our shield as small as possible and just allow things to get thrown at us and be protected? Certainly that's a value of a shield, but I don't think that's what we're being told here. We all could just hold and hide behind our shield of God and not worry about the world. But just like Cap, we're called to take up that shield and lean in. When things get hard, we're supposed to plant our feet, lean in, and know and trust in the reality of that shield. So we take that up, we lean in, and we're ready to go forward. As Cap relies on his shield, we are called to rely on Christ. It's a truly amazing concept, right? So we're called to go into this world to make a difference. We're called to be prepared. And one of the best parts about it is God goes before us in everything. So remember, as we go through the rest of today, God is our shield. The second point is that the world is tough. Nothing of what I've said is easy, right? We know that there are challenges before us. We know that there is evil and wickedness around us. But Christ reminds us in all of this that we're called to take heart. That just as John 16:32-33 tells us, a time is coming, and in fact has come, when you will be scattered, each to your own home. You will leave me all alone. Yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. So what was Christ reminding the disciples about? This was specifically just before his crucifixion and knowing that he was going to be handed over. He was having a conversation with his disciples of reminding them of what the world truly is like. They had no idea what was to come. We knew what was to come, and it wasn't a pleasant experience, right? We know that the crucifixion was a truly, truly ugly event. But the most amazing part of the other side of that event is what occurred for each and every one of us, right? So Christ knew things were going to be hard. He knew exactly what was coming before him. But what did he say? He said, "Yet I am alone. I am not alone, for my Father is with me." So just like David was talking about, just like Cap does and everything, Christ reminds us that this world is tough, but my Father, my shield, goes before even me. Isn't that really amazing? Christ came to pay for our sins. But even acknowledging, knowing full well what was coming, he said that he knew he had the protection and that shield, which empowered him to stand strong in an incredibly, incredibly difficult situation. He never faltered. He never let his shield fall. And Christ knew the rest of us would see exactly the same things in our life. stands as a great reminder that even though we know things can become incredibly tough before us, that God, the Father, Christ, will always be our shield and before us. So when things got incredibly tough, Cap always gets going as well, right? He picks his shield back up, especially if he's throwing it at somebody. He needs to get it back so he can throw it at the next guy. But he picks up his shield and leans in on the most difficult things. You guys remember the story of Civil War? Did you guys see that movie? Where him and Tony Stark, Iron Man, had a slight disagreement. And it splintered the group over the concept of government and his friends splitting completely over an issue of morality and ethics. And Cap just didn't know what to do. Tony was one of his greatest friends. He trusted the government that he had served for decades at this point. But something wasn't right. So Cap digs in his heels, he picks up his shield and leans in, and one of the most amazing conversations in comics takes place. You can go ahead and go to the next slide for this one. That during the setup to Civil War in comics, in Spider-Man 537, we see Cap take a stand that is truly amazing. And what he says is, it doesn't matter what the press says. It doesn't matter if the whole country decides that something wrong is something right. This nation was founded on one principle above all else: the requirement that we stand up for what we believe, no matter the odds or consequences. When the mob and the press and the whole world tell you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree beside the river of truth and tell the whole world, no, you move. You can go to the next slide for this as well. Anyone else kind of get a little chill? Big patriotic speech before the fight. Steve's talking about this really difficult concept, especially for a lot of us, and especially a lot of us as Christians, that there is a time to stand up and stand strong. Plant yourself right where you stand and stand on the truth and lovingly look at the people around you and say, no. We're very used to hearing the concept of saying yes and being kind. This is the other side of the same issue of who we're called to be as Christians, that sometimes it is right to stand up for exactly what is right, to stand for our faith, to stand for those in need. And Cap says, no, even if it's down to my friends in my country, sometimes that means I have to make a stand for something that's important. But what's really amazing to me is comics are not an isolated ecosystem of ideas. A lot of people went, that is the most amazing speech about standing strong and everything ever. You're right. You know why? Because Steve Rogers, Captain America, was quoting Psalm 1, 1 through 3, which most people around us had no idea. They just said, plant yourself next to the river of truth. That's amazing. It is amazing. And you know why? It's because our Lord told us this. So what does Psalm 1, 1 through 3 say? Well, it says, blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked or stand in the way that sinners take or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. What the psalmist is teaching us here is that reality, that no matter what happens around us, no matter what comes to us, one of the most important things we can do in our faith is remember who we are as Christians. Our identity comes from Christ, right? Yes, I know it's early, but our identity comes from who gave so much for us, that the day we become Christians, it's not just Chris. It's not just you guys. We do everything for the glory of the Lord, and all of this lays out that pattern. And one of my favorite parts of this in this comic is the fact that Cap, the Boy Scout, the perfect image of patriotism and strength, has the choice between his best friends and the government that he trusted so much, and still takes his position based on something he believes deeply in. But do you know why? He does so because it's not something that scares him. It does so because he knows his shield is there to protect him. Who's our shield? God is our shield. The world is tough. Cap shows us a great example of what a Christian can do in a tough and complicated world. And that leads us to our last point for this morning. And that is that we must be strong. So we know that God is our shield. We know that he goes before us. We know that the world can be incredibly complicated and that things are tough. You guys have to take tests and stuff, right? Go to gym and run the mile and all that kind of stuff. We all have our different challenges. But sometimes it's that time that you're just going to disagree with your friend, or you know that something isn't quite right. The world has a lot of different challenges it can throw at us. But the Lord calls us to be strong. So in Deuteronomy 31, 6 and 8, we get a great reminder that we're called to be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid and do not be discouraged. Sounds like a lot of repetition, right? That the writer was reminding us over and over again of what? Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. There's many other places in the Old Testament and the New Testament that we see this phrase. There's a reason for that. God knows that he's going with us. That even in the context of the Old Testament, he's reminding his people, this journey is not alone. You do not face any of these difficulties of your own volition. Have you ever tried to face that thing alone? You didn't have your friends or you didn't have anybody around. You forgot your shield for the fight. How'd that go? Probably not great. This is one of those things that we have to be reminded that this is something that we do together. We do together as friends, as Christians, but we also do together with God. So Cap always had to face so many different challenges throughout his life and throughout all of his complicated things. Just look at the movies, just the different folks that he's had to fight, the different villains. And then Civil War reminds us that sometimes those challenges can come from friends and from people that you trust and know very well. But the reality that God is our shield goes before us means that we can face any of those things, for we don't have to do so alone. So that doesn't necessarily mean that we got a super soldier serum, that a radioactive truck fell over, we got bit by a radioactive spider. Each and every one of us isn't necessarily, Peter Parker, Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, Doctor Strange, on and on. But we are who we are. We definitely don't have a Hulk, which is unfortunate, because if you have a Hulk, the Hulk always wins. We do have a Hulk. So, the most important thing that we can be reminded here out of the Old Testament is the reality that we are called to be strong in this world. And God functions as that ability to be able to enable us and make us strong at our core. So we can go ahead and get into kind of the wrap up for you guys this morning. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. So you say, so what, Chris? Pastor Chris, that's amazing. God is our shield. I think we understand that. That is a physical representation, just like Cap. It's something that we can put before us to defend us, but is also something that we can use to forge on and push into difficult times. That we are certainly not called to just put up our little shield, cower behind it, and sit in the corner and allow the world to just bombard us. That's not what Cap would do. It's not what Christ would do. It's not what we are called to do. But we do have to be reminded that the world is a complicated place. There's different challenges that we will be presented with at different times. Some will come from family, some will come with friends, some will come from those of us that are just trying to tear us down. But Christ reminds us that we must always take heart, for we don't do so alone. That just as we saw in John, that Christ even reminds us of the fact that he had his Father before him as well. And so finally, one of the things that we really absolutely need to take away from this is that as heroes of the faith or as people of faith, we never fight alone. This actually has multiple connotations. It can mean that as Christians, we are called to be a team of Christians together. You should always face the complications of the world together. But for the sake of what we're talking about today, you can go back, actually. Thank you. What do we see? We see 5 different Captain Americas on the screen there. But what's true of each and every one of them? They all have a shield, right? They do evolve as they go through their process, but even as Steve started, he had a different shield, but he always had a shield. He also always had a Bucky. I get that. And that's also important. And that could be an entirely separate discussion from the Bible, but that's why I said it's really important to know that we do so with our friends. But Cap never went anywhere without his shield because he understood the importance of being able to lean in when things got hard. That's why one of my favorite ones is actually the second Cap that's up there. You can go back. Thanks, bud. That shield is beat and worn. I think that's a great example of what is true about our faith and what's true about Christ and everything is God, as we trust in him, does take a lot for us. That as Christians and giving our faith over to him, it's important to know God has done so very much for us. And absolutely none of it did we deserve. None of it. And there's nothing that we can ever do to make up for that. But the most amazing reality of our relationship with Christ is through overabundant grace. God looked upon us, and as we invited him into our hearts, said, I forgive you, and it's because of my son. Don't ever forget as you go about your day-to-day that we have been given a gift so amazing that we should be willing to tell each and every person that we see about it. And then tell them about your shield, how you focus and go into the world. Because that shield allows you to plant yourself when things get tough, when people are challenging you over and over again. It means you have the strength to be able to stand, put up your shield, and say, no, you move. Now, don't misunderstand me. That doesn't mean you fight at the drop of every single little thing. But when things need to be discussed, when truth is being questioned, when morality is being questioned, you should never be fearful of saying what is right and standing for what is right. Our culture at times teaches us that this is not the thing to do, that you just agree with everybody and you let things pass. But as Christians, and especially as men, we're called to do something different. And just don't ever forget that that's not something you do of your own, but is something that we do together with God. One of the greatest realities of the Christian life is we didn't just drop to our knees and say a prayer and God said, you're good to go, and then God walked away. Is that the way you understand your faith? It shouldn't be. It should be the reality that as soon as we dropped to our knees and we said, God, yes, that God came to us and said, then we will go together so that we can reach the rest of the world, so that others can know. So I just challenge each of you to remember to take your shield, to take God wherever you go. That just as Cap carried his shield, to always remember to bring your shield. So that whenever things get tough, whenever things become complicated, you can take out your shield and lean in and know that God is with you. Guys, let me pray for you this morning. Father, I just thank you for the opportunity to be able to preach this morning, to be able to bring your word and be able to mix it with a unique connotation of comic books and culture and art, and just be able to show your beauty and your glory to these wonderful minds before us. We pray that you would make us strong, embolden us, and give us that reminder daily that you are our shield, that you protect us as we go out into the world. And we also pray that you would give us the strength to know when to stand, and when to fight, and when to say the right things, and to know when to say, no, you move. Father, I thank you for each of these. I ask that you bless their day, and that you be with us throughout the rest of the week. For it's in your Son's most glorious name we pray. Amen.